Hi folks, in today's video I'm going to be sharing how we redecorated a couple of bedrooms in a couple of days and also a new toy that we've got to play with. So stick around and we'll make a start. A quick bit of background before we start. As far as spraying goes and background, I mean, when we moved here we had an HVLP sprayer and we used that really only for trim and other bits and bobs and spraying stonework. And then only 2 years ago did I switch to a higher quality airless system, and since then I've been using it for cabinets, doors, skirting boards, trim and all that sort of stuff. But if you want to be spraying larger surfaces or larger volumes of paint, then really you need a larger unit. So if you're doing walls and ceilings, you can't get away with a handheld system really, and that's why we went ahead and invested in this. Later on in the video I'll be talking about some of the pros and cons and also some other bits and bobs on decorating. So stick around, enjoy the video, and we'll see you at the end. Okay, it's 8 o'clock at night, kids have gone to bed. It's probably the worst time to start up an airless sprayer. If it's too loud we might have to hold and wait until the morning. Hopefully it'll be alright. I'm thinking I might hang the door back on and then just mask it at the top because we'll be painting those in the future. Right, all being well, we're sealed in now. So we're going to give the paint a stir and get it all primed up. Right, so I'm going straight into here. Of course, you're probably meant to, well, you are definitely meant to pass it through a strainer, make sure there's no lumps and bumps in it, because even new paint is going to have bits. But we should hopefully be alright. So I've gone straight in there. Now we need to prime it up. Basically, it's going to come up the feed, and then there's a return hose on here. Once that's back in, then we're primed. It all depends how noisy it is. We could be knocking this on the head very soon. I'm using this short extension, which is just a third-party cheapy thing. If there's problems, then we can revert to not using it, but hopefully the seals are going to be okay in there. All right, so that's going to go to prime once we're plugged in. We should be priming the hose at this point. Alright, now I can check on proper. Right, I think we're ready to paint. So nozzle can go on now. So the tip I'm using is the 517, which is I think the same as I use in the Graco on walls. There is a finer one for if you were doing thinner finishing. Right, I think we're set for attempt number 1. Ceilings only in this room and the coving. I'm going to switch to the GoPro, see what the overspray is like. It's meant to be better than other machines, so I'm going to throw a little test patch on this wall. It'll dry quick enough. One thing I have noticed is it leaves a little bit of a squirt at the end as soon as you turn it off, so I'm just going to make sure that I finish off the wall, off the ceiling in this case, so we'll hopefully try and keep it running constantly. Okay, zero fallout really in comparison to the other sprayers I've used. White on white is not a good test because I can't really make out what I've done. I think the real proof will be when we move on to the walls, but for now let's go to the other room, get that ceiling done.
Thought I may as well practice whilst I've got cheap contract matte there, and I can block out that, might end up using less paint when we come to do the actual colour tomorrow. Quite addictive, I might just do the whole room.
Right, with both ceilings done and a bit of a dress rehearsal by using up some of that contract matte to give this wall a whitewash before the colour, the next day I'm making a start on the walls. You can see these are quite small tubs which aren't that conducive to using on a large sprayer like this, but once the whole lot's all primed up and ready to go, I can add the spray tip and then I can make a start. Now this is quite a light coloured paint, but it's still dark enough that I can actually see what I'm doing, so I can make sure that I'm getting a good coverage, a good overlap, and getting a decent flat finish over the whole wall. Like anything, it's just a case of practice makes perfect, or somewhere towards perfect, and a little bit like using an aerosol can to spray paint something, you kind of have that technique of not stopping and starting all the time and trying to spray off the surface and then coming back on while still spraying. So that way you're not at any point stopping and getting that little spit of paint, which I was finding, which I think is probably due to the extension rod rather than the actual gun itself. Because I'm using smaller tubs, you can hear at this point it just doesn't have quite enough left there to draw it up, so you have to add a little bit more in to make sure there's enough depth of liquid there for it to work. You're not wasting any paint, you just need a little bit more than you think. Then once you're done, the way you do it is you basically put the pickup hose into a bucket of clean water. Then that's going to flush it through and you're spraying all the paint out the hose back into your tin or your tub, and as soon as you see the clear water coming through, then at that point you stop and you can start cleaning the machine. So you don't really have any wastage as such. All that material that's still left in the hose comes out and can be reused, and then you move on to cleaning. Now, whatever you do, don't believe the commercial videos and the adverts that come with these sort of machines. It's never quite as simple as they make it look. It is self-cleaning to a point. It flushes itself through and discharges the dirty water back out. But you need to do that several times, and it's always best to take apart the bits, clean them, put them back on, and then flush it. So it's probably, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes worth of work to get it all completely cleaned, flushed out, and ready to store away. It worked great on the ceilings last night, great on that kind of mist coat that we did, but in this room now I'm going to use just a small handheld unit. It's a borderline amount. It's only kind of probably 3 litres to put on, so it makes sense. That's only 3 top-ups. I've also moved that extension arm over, so that will help just keep a nice even sort of approach to the wall. So I've masked off all of the clothing that is dry from last night. Now, in all honesty, I'd much rather use paper from an environmental point of view. However, it's not really that practical if you haven't got the dispenser, the masking tool, which doubles up the paper and the tape together. So I'm just using that pre-formed, really thin plastic film, which is just an easier way to go. The reason I've already masked and I'm not using the masking part of the roll, like this stuff here, is because I painted that about 12 hours ago. So it's quite delicate, so I've used a really low tack masking tape up there, same on the skirting boards. So I'm then gonna put my masking over the top of that masking tape, if that makes sense. Such is life when you're trying to do things in a 24-hour, 36-hour turnaround. So there we go, that is the first use of the larger airless unit. Now in a minute I'm going to be talking about my opinions and experiences with all sorts of spraying, but let me give you a little walk around and show you some of the finishes. and how things worked out. Now, it's not going to be that easy to get this across on camera, how well and smooth things turned out, but as far as the coving up at the top there, you imagine anything that's got a profile on it, spraying is so easy and effective at getting into all of those grooves, so even if you hit it only at one angle with the fan, you tend to get into everything of that profile. And again, the sealing was terrible before. You could make out roller lines, mainly from my technique than anything, and late night, probably doing it at midnight when we first moved in. But now we've just got that constant super flat finish. And normally my paint of choice for ceilings is Dulux Super Matte. Sorry, it's a bit echoey, you know. And that is just so flat that if you've got any imperfections in your ceiling, or it's a new ceiling as well, it's just super flat. Hence the name, I guess, Super Matte. So there's no sheen on it at all. It's a relatively, well, quite a breathable paint off the shelf. It's really easy to get hold of, and it's just a little bit of a league above normal contract matte. That said, the coat that I put over here was just a normal contract matte white, and that's just fine. So I would stay away from anything with a shine or a sheen on it, especially if you're doing ceilings. Again, it's super hard to give an idea of how flat this was, and because it was rolled before, but hopefully you can see it's just super even. And yes, you can achieve certain bits with a roller, but where it really comes into its own, when it comes to walls and ceilings, it's just about consistency and speed and efficiency. But when it comes to the trim, that's where airless really, or spraying in general, really gets a premium result. On a whole, really happy with how this turned out. A couple of points to make is, one, you really wouldn't want to spray a room any smaller than this. It just wouldn't be sensible to do that with this size sprayer. One of the main reasons for that is the volume of liquid, the paint, which is taken up in the hose is quite a bit. It's, I guess, maybe over a litre. So if you just went out and bought 2.5 pot of, emulsion, 2.5 litres, then you wouldn't really have enough paint there. Although you might have enough paint to cover the walls, you wouldn't have enough to prime all the hoses and then spray. Now, I've loved using my Graco Ultra handheld sprayer for the last couple of years, and I've done everything from kind of cabinets through to small sections of walls and doors, and I haven't had any problems with it really whatsoever. Even the volume of it, while the pot only takes a litre, it's only a case of 2 or 3 changes and you can spray a very small amount of emulsion on walls and not really have a problem. In the back bedroom, I actually used the Graco because we had 2 wall colours and it just didn't make sense to be using this, flushing it all out, and one of the colours happened to be a dark blue, and 1 drop of that in the other paint would have been a nightmare. So it's much easier to clean that smaller unit. It doesn't take much different as far as time wise, but as far as wastage or just the size of it, it's a little bit easier. Now, I looked at using Graco for the larger sprayer, but their least or most affordable option, their cheapest option, is about twice the price of this one. So while I would say perhaps the Graco ones are more pro level, this is more of a prosumer, I would say. I wouldn't imagine that this is rated for constant construction use. Cost-wise, I think they're probably quite comparable. The smaller Graco, I think, is $499, $450 or something like that. It's the corded version I use, and I don't really have a problem with that because I'm never going to be that far from a socket, and also the option of using a machine like this, you're always going to be connected by both the power and the hose to the gun. So the idea of just using a battery system as well, it's a DeWalt battery system, which is a different platform from what I use. But anyway, today's topic is this machine, and as far as the setup, it was fairly straightforward. Clean down really doesn't take that long. A lot of people are put off by the clean down time on spraying. Once you've done it a couple of times, it's really quite easy. The key is just to have a couple of buckets of clean water there, and then it's a case of kind of taking the bits off, giving them a rinse, connect it up, and you can really just, it flushes itself through. So especially if you're using whites and light colours, it seems to clean out very, very easily. Really, these rooms are more of a trial for this than anything else. The main reason for buying this is, one, we've got the big studio to spray next month, which is, I guess it's about 30 square meters, big high ceilings, and this is just, and everything's gonna be white, both walls and ceilings. This is just gonna eat it up because it's just so easy to hit everything in one pass. Masking is something else which comes into play when you're spraying. Yes, there is overspray, and you need to make sure you kind of think about where that's gonna land. Spraying all of the trim first, especially if you're using like an eggshell or a satin, get all that done. You don't really need to mask that off because any light overspray onto the walls you can just rub back before you put your emulsion on. So I did that on day one, and then the next day was dry enough to use a delicate low tack masking tape on top of that, and I used just the masking film to go over. And again, you need to think about if you're spraying ceilings, what you end up with is, because of the way it atomizes the paint as it comes out of the gun, it almost dries in the air, so you end up with dust. And it's not going to stick to stuff like wet paint, but it does kind of sit in the air a bit. And if you have an open door and there's a bit of a draft, it might pull it through. So it's better to just mask off that door. That said, this unit has far less of that overspray, especially when you're doing the ceilings, that noticeable overspray, than the other unit. And a lot of that's down to tip size and pressures and just generally knowing what you're doing. But even just teaching myself, I could see that using this versus the other machine, instantly this seems to have less overspray. So if you were under the impression that it's kind of 80% prep and 20% painting with decorating, when it comes to spraying it's more like 90% prep and masking, 5% of the doing and 5% cleanup. It really takes no time at all. When you're all set up and everything's primed and ready, it's less than a minute. No, I mean, I could look back at the footage and check that because I filmed everything. But there's no way near as much time actually painting. Probably when I put that white contract mat in this whole room, just basically because it was all ready, I thought I may as well block out the old paint. It can't have taken more than 3 or 4 minutes to paint the whole room, ceiling and walls, top to bottom. So there's an efficiency there, and especially if you're using the same paint over large expanses, whether it's white for all your ceilings or if you're carrying the same wall colour through 1 or 2 or 3 rooms, then it's a great way to go. When you're doing cabinets and doors and things like that, then it's quite obvious that spraying will give you a better finish. Now, one of the main reasons for that is if you're using water-based paints, they just don't finish that well on joinery. So the last day or two I've been painting that panelling, and I did that without the roller, without the sprayer. When you're using a roller or even a brush, they tend to dry so quick and you just don't get that sort of smooth finish that you might have with older solvent, paints. So when you do use a water-based paint in a sprayer, you can still achieve that really, really nice smooth finish. As far as a DIY point of view, I would say that if I've had lots of messages saying, we've taken on a new renovation, would you look at investing in a sprayer? And I'd say that if you're going to do it, then go for a bigger unit if you're going to use it on walls and ceilings, and aim to do as much as you can in phases. So if you can do all your ceilings in a 4-bed house, you could easily do that in a day for a start, but also your setup, your hose is a certain length anyway, you could set it up on the landing and spray all your rooms and be done. So, or mist coating walls as well. One of the main drawbacks people talk about with spraying is touch-ups afterwards, and the finish from a spray on a new skimmed wall or new surface is so smooth and flawless that if you came back in and touched that up with a brush or a roller in years to come, that might stand out quite a lot. Even with a matte paint, you'd be able to spot it. So one option there, which seems to be done a lot, I've not tried it myself, is to back roll the paint. So if you're going on either yourself or working with someone, if you're spraying on your ceilings and your walls, you basically just going on with a roller afterwards, not loaded with paint, but just to roll and give it that slight kind of rolled surface, so that if you did come back in a year or two, you can just roll it and it won't show up. So that seems a little bit counterproductive because you're doing something twice, but actually you're not painting the wall. You're literally just in one pass. You don't have to load the roller or anything. You're just rolling over that sprayed surface. And remember, that sprayed surface has gone on so quick and so evenly that most of the work is done. It's just that follow-up. There we go. There's a bit of an insight into both the new machine and just spraying in general. Now, like I said, you don't need to fork out a huge amount to start off with. The HVLP sprayers, while they might be a bit more fussy when thinning down the paints and stuff like that, they can create incredible results. And 3 or 4 years ago, whenever I did that staircase project, all those spindles, trim, banisters, all the skirting boards throughout the hall, stairs and landing were all done with that cheaper unit. A little bit more fussy as far as mixing it down, less control with the nozzle and the tip or anything like that, and you get what you pay for. So as soon as you move on to larger surfaces or you want a finer finish, then it makes sense to spend a bit more. But hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight. Of course, there will be people who say, absolutely not, I'm sticking with the roller, and that's fine. I mean, there's many times which I imagine I will be using rollers in the future and not always sticking with spraying, but where possible, and I can group stuff together and do stuff in bigger batches, or if I'm doing cabinets and doors, I'm not going to be getting a roller out anymore. I'm always going to be setting up a little spray section, or even doing it outside and getting that really nice smooth finish, especially if you spent a lot of time making doors or building a unit and then you let it down. And that's what happened last week with that wall paneling. Rolled the finish on and it just killed the project for me a bit. So I do intend to sand that back and spray it when I get the energy to do that. Love to hear your thoughts on the only way is to spray, which I don't think it is, but it'd be good to see what you think. Things are moving, technology moves through construction and DIY. When you think about every other tool and every other part and segment of construction, everything is modernized, whereas I feel like decorating hasn't really changed much. And maybe that's for a good reason, but you know, hand saws have been replaced for some jobs by, simple but more powerful and portable saws. No one's really hand screwing in construction screws anymore. And we're not using hand forged nails, and there's all these things. A lot of things have changed. We use a laser level because quite clearly that is an accurate way of mapping out a room. We use a distance finder to measure a long room rather than having a sag and a tape level. So you can't always say that old technology is better. Maybe in decorating it is. So that's why I thought we'd kick it off in the comment section and see what people think. Most of the moans will be about the prep and the clean down. But once you've addressed those and you've got used to those, or you might even enjoy those, then there's nothing to stop you getting that sprayed finish, and it really does stand out. No one really touches up their ceilings that much, so that concept of not being able to touch up afterwards, it's not going to really stop me. I think I would always just leave a really nice flat sprayed finish on a ceiling and not mess around with back rolling. Maybe on the walls I would, but there we go. That's my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours, but thank you for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time.